Gail, and I'm an alcoholic. I am so happy to be here. Are you guys having a good time?
Yeah.
I want to welcome all the new people that have come to join us tonight for this special event. And I'm sure they can feel the spirit in the room and the gratitude for what we've already experienced in the last couple hours. I heard the workshops this afternoon really went well. Let's open this meeting with the Serenity Prayer. Again, a moment of silence for those pioneers, those early men and women that went before us and helped and kept the faith. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. It's going on too. It's getting a little wild and crazy tonight. In fact, I've heard that we've got some entertainment that I didn't even schedule this in. This has been kind of a spontaneous move on some of our guests' part. So that'll remain a mystery for a few minutes. I have a few, just a little bit of business that I want to attend to first, and then we'll have a sobriety countdown. I thought that might be kind of fun. Yeah. Okay. It's Saturday night. It's time to party. One thing I want to tell you is that the tapers, Jerry and Jill, have asked that you order your tape sets in advance for pickup on Sunday. And that's a 12-tape set for $45. So if you would cooperate with that, appreciate that. We also have the copies of David's talk, and I'll be putting them over on the table over here for those of you that would like a transcript of that morning talk. The transcript will be over on this table, and the transcripts from other things I put on the back table over here. So those of you that are registered guests, if you missed anything in your packet, you might find it back there. I guess it's leaving Akron. We've held it here, this workshop. This will be the third year. And I need to tell you that the footwork that we put in was just the footwork. You brought the spirit. You brought the enthusiasm. You're what made it work. When you showed up, it's just been amazing every year. And I, first of all, want to thank all our guests for coming. We have 23 states here. We have about 130 registered? I know we have at least 130. And that's a pretty amazing representation of the United States to have that many representatives of their states here. And I guess I really want to start thanking some people because it does take a lot of work, and it takes support from people. The first people I'd like to thank is the members of the Akron Intergroup Office board members, those that are here tonight. Would you please stand so we can thank you? I'm sure our guests appreciate your support. And I appreciate your patience and tolerance with some of the risks I take and some of the crazy activities that we promote, like this weekend. And it's sure nice to have you here to share my friends in the archival community with you. I also really, there's different committees that work, and probably my favorite committee is what I call the Grunt Committee. They're the people that show up and carry the boxes. They carry the hammers and the nails, and I say, I want a banner here, I'd like to have this here, and I don't know how they make it happen, but it always happens. And this is our third year for doing this. So some of you have seen some familiar faces here. You've seen David, you've seen Ken, you've seen Jim Burns, and there's a few new assistants. There's Sandra, and there's Elizabeth, and wait a minute, there's somebody I forgot. Theron. And I said Jim Burns and Sue Mumper, and would you all stand so I make sure that you get recognized, because I know they want to thank you for all the love and service. And Jay. It's a great, great committee, and it works just so smooth, and I know you've seen that each year. And I really appreciate you guys for all the things that you make happen. I also now want to thank the area. We talk about spirit of cooperation, but I have walked with these people since we decided to do this together, and I have experienced the spirit of cooperation. I don't think we've had as much as a ripple. It's just been, what can we do? And people just jumping to do it. Would the members of Area 54 that have participated in this workshop in a spirit of cooperation with us please stand at this time? They ran the tours, the hospitality, the technology. Isn't that cool? It is so cool. Okay. Next, I think we have a little. Let me see. It's Bob. Bob, would you come up now?
Thank you very much. I am Bob, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm here from Area 31, Springfield, Mass. I have a special friend here with me tonight who is the public information of Area 31. And it's special to him because he's able to see now what archives is about, where it happened. When we do our PR presentations, we also give an AA history. So now it means a lot more. I'd like to ask Gary Danforth to come forward. We have a 7-year medallion. 7 years anniversary this evening. I'd like to give him his anniversary medal.
You wouldn't want to get up in front of all these people and tell them how it works, would you?
I'm Jerry. I'm an alcoholic. Gosh, can I faint? Oh, how does it work? Oh, gosh. 7 years yesterday, I self-induced a stroke. Today I call my sobriety date. It's been a walk. I found a sponsor who was willing to work with me. It hasn't been easy. He's been able to kick Gary in the rear end and say, Gary, you need to get to a meeting. That doesn't make any sense. Why do I need to do that? But, nobody ever told me to get involved in service. I had to find it for myself. It has been a hard road. It's been an easy road. It's been a fun road. Like I said last night when I identified myself, I'm looking for a new road to continue my service. All I can say is I try to do it as simply as I possibly can. And with the help of people like you, I can do it. And I'm continuing to do it. In 7 years today, it's like such a miracle. To me, it is. That's how it works for me. Very simple. Thank you very much.
What it's all about. Do we have one other presentation? This must have been a good month for getting sober.
I'm an alcoholic, and my name's Klaus Krober. And the reason I'm here is to help make sure that the distorted message of Alcoholics Anonymous always will remain undistorted. But today is a double day for me because my middle daughter is celebrating a belly button birthday in Florida. And then I got this friend of mine back there who's today celebrating 23 years without a drink. Come on, C.J. Fierno.
And I am an alcoholic. It's a beautiful day. I'm sober. 23 years ago today, they hauled me into Logansport, and I had to see with my own 2 eyes that alcohol can kill you. Because the night before that, and that morning, they had wheeled 2 drunks out on a cart that was dead. So I made up my mind right quick like that I wasn't going to be the third one on there, but I thought I was. So I got involved in AA 23 years ago in service work. I went home to my hometown in Wabash and back to my job at General Tire Rubber Company. And but there was only 4 or 5 people there then, and I got into service work, and I've been in service work for 23 years. And I have worked up the ladder with the help of my friend Klaus. He is my chauffeur now. You know that after you get to be about 77 or better, I don't like to drive in these big towns, so I bought me a brand new 1992 Cougar for my 17th AA birthday present. And Klaus, he loves to drive it, and he is a good driver. And I'm telling you, we have put some miles on it, and I miss him because he called me up, and he lives in Fort Wayne, and I live in Wabash, and he knows when he comes down that I have the Cougar out of the way, and he drives his Mercedes in. He's got a Mercedes that's 300,000 miles on it or better, and he took me a ride in it the other night, and it was a lovely ride. He's taken good care of it, just like he has his sobriety. He's taken me everywhere I have went about with him. Twice we've been to Illinois this summer in a couple conventions, and he spoke down at Terre Haute here a 3 weeks ago, and I went down there with him, and he's really, I love the man. He's got a beautiful wife and some children that I have never met, but they are, if they're anything like him, it's going to rub off. So, thank you.
So much. Congratulations. Bob, would you like to come up and read the statement and help us with the sobriety countdown? While you're up here doing that, I told Sue that all she had to do was come up here and just breathe because she's scared to death of you. So you're standing up here applauding me, and she's going, speech, speech. She's so ornery. I don't know. Thank you so much. I can't tell you, though, the joy that it brings me to see you having a good time, to see you enjoying the work that we do, because this has become a we thing. It really, the story of the growth and the progress, there are so many people whose hands have touched it and whose efforts are now involved in it, and now you're a part of it. And it's just like having one, it's like we have this material, and now we're starting to share that. And I can't tell you the joy that it brings me to see you enjoying the work. There is no real paycheck in AA, but we get a lot of satisfaction from the work that we do in service. So I'm honored to serve Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm honored to be the archivist in Alcoholics Anonymous in Akron, Ohio. So thank you so much.
Wow. I'm an alcoholic named Bob. Hi, everyone. I'm a member of the Community Sunday group of Alcoholics Anonymous, the group that asks the question, are we having fun yet? And a couple of years ago, some folks got together and there was an election, and if you're from around here and you live north of East Liverpool, I'm your delegate. So that, I guess, is what got me here in the first place. There were questions about an archives committee. I knew this was going on down here. I didn't feel I could escape it, even though you folks scared me a little. I knew you all had a little mold growing on your hind ends here and things like that, but I came here the first year because I had to. I came back because I wanted to, and I guess you've made a convert. General service, we make a lot of suggestions, and this is a real strong one I'd like to read here. It's called AA Anonymity, Announcement for Reading at Meetings Open to the Public. There may be some here who are not familiar with our tradition of personal anonymity at the public level. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Thus, we respectfully ask that AA speakers and AA members not be photographed, videotaped, or identified by full name on audio tapes and in published or broadcast reports of our meetings. The assurance of anonymity is essential in our efforts to help other problem drinkers who may wish to share our recovery program with us, and our tradition of anonymity reminds us that AA principles come before personalities. We have a one-day-at-a-time program, but sometimes we stand back and recognize large groups of those 1 days at a time. Are there some of you here who would admit to having less than 1 year of sobriety? Would you please stand? Less than 2 years? Less than 3 years? Four? Five? Six? Seven? Eight? Nine? 10? Over 10, but less than 15? 15, but less than 20? 20, but less than 25? 25, but less than 30? Gail, I got 13. I didn't raise my hands either. How many years you got? 20 in May. Where was I? 25 but less than 30? I did that. Okay, 30 but less than 35. 35 but less than 40. This her anniversary? Yesterday, 33 years. 40 but less than 45? Anyone here with more than 45? Oh, okay, we got two. How many, Cersei? 52? And thank you. I missed 35 to 40? No.
I think this is. Okay, now for our special entertainment. What have you boys prepared for us tonight? Cersei? Oh my God. Ken, this is your singing group here, and they all of a sudden don't act like they know what to do. Can you tell them what to do? What song have you chosen, Smitty? You promised me you would sing. What? Oh, Ken, your group is just so disorganized. They're so dysfunctional without you. Can you come pull them together here? You know they want to sing. They want to sing. Yeah.
Hey, whoa. Where you going?
Okay. Let them test the mixing.
Oh my gosh.
It's up to you. Well, come on now. You told me you had 3 of them you wanted to do. Well, the only one I know is when I went to high school with a guy named Stuart Hamblin. And he later on became an alcoholic, although he was the son of a Methodist minister. And anyhow, he wrote all the religious songs for those movies out in Hollywood. And later on, he became an alcoholic, and later on, he became a member of AA, and he died 2.5 years in AA when he died. But he wrote a lot of songs, good songs, spiritual songs. And one that Bob and I sing all the time together, and I hope you'll join us and everybody else. It is no secret what God can do. You know it?
Yeah.
Well, let's sing it.
Read it in all bases. Go.
The chimes of time ring out the news. Another day is through. Someone slipped and fell. Was that someone you? You may have longed for added strength, your courage to renew. Do not be discouraged, cause I have news for you. It is no secret what God can do. What He's done for others, He'll do for you. With eyes wide open, He'll pardon you. It is no secret what God can do. I think that'll do.
That isn't even the barbershop quartet stuff we were working on earlier.
Cersei really came to sing bass.
Yeah.
So we thought we'd let him. Thank you so much. That was fun. And it's historical. I don't think it's ever been done before that I know about. They'll be signing tapes later. Okay, I won't keep our panelists waiting any longer. I will tell you that when I left the archives after giving a workshop and to run home, and it was kind of like a superwoman kind of thing. I kind of ran in my condo and ran out. Just enough time to press my answering machine to hear, and I'm sorry to tell you that Bill Dotson, Bill Dotson Jr., the only son of Bill Dotson, will not be with us tonight, and his family. They were so looking forward to this. They had a lot to share with us about how he felt about anonymity and how he felt about the humility of this program, and they remember that. And they did not know that their father's voice had ever been recorded. I have a tape here of Bill Dotson to give them and a picture of the man on the bed. They do not know how much we value the third man. And I really look forward to sharing with them the archives and our book, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. So I will get to do that with them, but I'm sorry they can't be here tonight. And to feel your love for them, they cannot comprehend why we would want them here. And, you know, I tried to tell them that they are part of our family, and that's how I feel about the people that are here tonight. These are children of the healers. And some of them know how much we love them because we show them every chance we get. They were part of our first family in AA. They were the children of the people who took the people into their homes. Their parents prayed for this program. And when you come to know the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, you just fall in love with that story. And you fall in love with the people. There just wasn't quite anything like them. And they were the first century people in our fellowship. And you know, I'm sure our gratitude overwhelms them. I took Sue to a Women's International, and there was 3,000 women there, and I thought I'd be there to kind of help her in and help her out and everything. I thought that'd be kind of nice. And those women about knocked me down to get next to her. We were going to say the Our Father. They took my hand out of hers and stuck theirs in mine, and they just couldn't get enough of Sue. And so tonight, I know some of them don't like to talk, and I promised them they could just come up here and breathe. And but they did agree to answer questions. Some of them are more comfortable with audiences like this, and they have agreed to speak with you and tell you a little bit about what they remember of days that we did not walk. We can still touch them, and we still talk to them, and we can carry this message to those who you sponsor and those who you will meet along this road. And I think this whole thing becomes more real when we touch the past. So, John, if you would come up, please. If you're more comfortable up here, that would be great. This is John Seiberling. This is Henrietta's son. He's former congressman and representative here, and he still has a lot to share with us about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Thank you, Gail. I feel almost as though I'm here under false pretenses because I didn't realize that this was anything but a small little get-together of 3 or 4 people. But this is a thrill for me. And to see all of you stand up when your period of sobriety began was a really marvelous experience. There are some wonderful books. Gail's already referred to one, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, that tell you a lot of the details about how AA got started. And from my own personal awareness, because I was Henrietta's son, and I was there when Bill and Bob first started coming to our house, and my mother would tell me of their discussions. So I have that kind of acquaintance. Not as close as Bob and Smitty and Sue, because not only was their dad one of the co-founders, but Bill lived at their house, and a whole lot of other of the first recruits, you might say, came through their house. And both their mother and father were really spiritual people, and I'm sure discussed with them what was going on in their evolved thinking. In fact, I remind myself when I think about these wonderful publications that are available to anybody who wants to know what AA is all about just from reading it. Remind me, when I'm speaking about it, of the senator who got up and was on the floor of the Senate and was reading from a very learned treatise about some subject, and none of his colleagues were paying any attention. And finally he said, "My colleagues, I want you to listen to what I'm reading here. These aren't my words. These are the words of someone who knows what he's talking about." Now, when it comes to having a strong sense of the spiritual importance the importance of spirituality in your life, and a strong sense of what the teachings of Christ mean in terms of your own personal life and your spiritual life. Henrietta was certainly an outstanding personality, and she really probably began her spiritual evolution when she was a girl, and her mother was a good Presbyterian, but it wasn't until the Oxford group came to Akron in 1933 that she began to see a new way of looking at the teachings of Christ. And I was fortunate enough that she took me to some of those AA meetings when the top AA team with Frank Bookman, the founder, and all these wonderful other people were here in Akron, and it certainly made a difference in my life. When I got the crazy idea one time that I wanted to run for Congress, my mother didn't think it was a very good idea, but you know, the times were tough. We were in Vietnam and so forth. And one of the things that I did was to have a fundraising dinner. There were about as many people at it as are here, because the speaker was Senator Harold Hughes of Iowa. And he came to Akron just to speak for me. And I was telling him while we were eating dinner about how AA got started in Akron. And he said, well, I just want to tell you something. He said, 10 years ago, I knew one of three things was going to happen to me. I was going to stop drinking, or I was going to quit suicide, or else I was going to commit suicide, or else I was going to go insane. And I didn't have the slightest idea how I was going to stop drinking. So you tell your mother, she saved my life. And he meant it, too. Well, Henrietta would have said, no, I didn't save his life. God saved his life. But if I was a small instrument of God in helping to bring about this result, then I will concede that much. Henrietta was the one who implanted the idea that AAs should remain anonymous, not just to save themselves embarrassment, but because she felt it was wrong to have people feel important when they're in the presence of spiritual truth. And I think that was one of the very best things that happened. Bill and Bob helped reform the Oxford Group Spirituality into a program aimed directly for the problems of alcoholics. But beyond that, Henrietta was a kind of sounding board for them, since they respected her, and she was not an alcoholic, so they bounced their ideas off her. And many nights, Bill and Bob and Ann would be over at our house, or she'd be there, trying to see what this all added up to. I'll never forget the day they brought their first new AA. There was no AA then, but he was a drunk, as they referred to him, to our house. It was Bill Dotson. The doorbell rang. I looked out the window, and I said to my mother, "There's the funniest looking man out here." And then she came to the door, and Bill and Bob were with him, I guess. And they introduced Bill to her, and to Bill Dotson, and I met him at the same time. Bill Dotson became one of the most wonderful people you can possibly imagine once he got that chain of alcoholism dropped from around his neck. And I'll just tell one other little anecdote, because some of you may have some questions you want to ask later on of the panel, including me, about what I understand about certain things about AA. But you all remember Wilbur Mills. Some of you may have met him. Well, there's some good stories about Wilbur and Fanny Fox and so forth. But when Wilbur finally admitted that he had a drinking problem, he gave up being chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. It was considered before that to be the most powerful man in the Congress. And for a couple of years, he stayed in Congress, and he finally retired. But after he'd been sober for a couple of years, he said to me one day, you know, I've been sober now for 2 years, and they're the happiest years of my entire life. Here's a guy who was considered to be the most powerful man in Washington. We know today that power alone, without spiritual content, is a treacherous thing. And Wilbur became a changed person and has been to Akron and many other AA meetings of AAs in other parts of the country. Well, being an ex-politician, I guess I could ramble on indefinitely. But let me just say, you didn't come to hear me. I had the fortune to be Henrietta's son when she was evolving as a spiritual person. I'll just mention one other thing that you might be interested in. You all may remember that back in the 80s, when Gorbachev became the head of the Soviet Union, one of the first things he did was to start an effort to stop the problem of drinking in Russia, to discourage people from drinking. And I was still in the Congress at that time, and one morning, shortly after Gorbachev announced his anti-alcoholism campaign, I woke up and the thought came to me. My mother might call it guidance, but anyway, the thought came to me, you know, we could help Gorbachev by getting the Russians to let AA have groups in Russia. And you know, during the communist era, they didn't want any organizations that weren't controlled by the communists themselves. So I thought, well, let me explore this. I went in to see Tip O'Neill, who was then the Speaker of the House, and I told him about it, my idea. He said, oh, that's a great idea. He said, that would give us a completely new relationship with the Russians on an issue, a subject where we have mutual interest to help solve the problem of alcoholism in our countries. So he said, and you might like to know something else. He said, my son, who's the head of the Speaker of the House of the Massachusetts legislature, is an alcoholic and a member of AA. So we never know, you know, sometimes where someone needs help. But there was a good example of someone who was helped. Anyway, a couple of months later, I find myself at a luncheon, which Tip O'Neill arranged, and I'm sitting by coincidence next to the equivalent of the Speaker of the House from the Supreme Soviet, which was the Soviet legislature in Moscow. And I thought, well, this Tip undoubtedly arranged this, so I told this gentleman who was this top guy in the Soviet Union about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I said, you know, we have this real problem in this country, and AA has helped us solve it. Maybe we ought to get together with some of your people and see if we can learn something from you. And he said to me, well, he said, you're way ahead of us. But he said, I think that's a great idea, and we ought to pursue it. A year later, a year or two later, I guess it was, after I left the Congress, an official delegation came from the Soviet Union of people in their anti-alcohol organization. And they came, guess where they came to? Akron, Ohio. And we had a very nice meeting here. And as many of you may know today, there are now AA groups in every single major city in the former Soviet Union. So we never know when the right word at the right time with the right message is going to make a difference. And I just feel it's made a difference in my life, even though alcoholism wasn't one of my problems. Though my wife, my lovely wife Betty, who's sitting here with me, can tell you I probably have my share of problems, and she reminds me of it when it's appropriate. So, anyway, I want to say it's a big thrill for me to be here, and I hope you find Akron as a workplace worth coming back to. You have some wonderful people here. Thank you.
Thanks for saying yes when I ask you to do these kinds of things, John. Well, I didn't know it was going to be a big crowd like this. I could have called the psychic hotline. But, is there a chance that the grandson of Delphine Weber is here with us tonight? He told me he would be. Is Mark here? I told the story of the phone call from Delphine to your mom. And that's when your mom began to specifically pray for Dr. Bob. Delphine Weber calls his mother and says, "What are we going to do about Dr. Bob?" And Henrietta says, "What do you mean, what are we going to do about Dr. Bob?" And she says, "Well, he's got a terrible drinking problem. He's ready to lose his practice and his job." And Henrietta went into guidance and began praying for Dr. Bob. And I believe it's that prayer that started the King's School Group. In fact, I don't believe, I know it was that prayer. It was just weeks later that Bill Wilson came to town. And she would call Ann with that guidance. She'd say, Ann, I got guidance for Bob. And then she'd say, "Don't touch the first drink." And I think Bob was always a little disappointed in that. I think he expected a little more meat on that. But John, I on behalf of
Bob said it, the problem isn't the first drink. He said, but I just keep on. And of course, we all know that you have to start with the first one. But nevertheless, that wasn't generally realized at the time.
Right.
And I think it really was guidance.
It was profound. And we use it today. It's so simple, but it is so profound. Thank you so much, and thank you. I guess Henriette isn't here with us, so we'll just have to thank you for all those prayers and for coming when we asked you to come and share with us about your mom. So many friends of Alcoholics Anonymous still with us. The next fellow I'm about to, a guy from Texas. By the way, those two boys that sang for us are both from Texas. We wanted to get them home on the range, but they wouldn't do it. And I just glad that he's back home with us. Now, I know he migrated down there to Texas. He was once the mayor of Narcona. And we have the politicians on the left and the ladies on the right. Anyway, I'm just glad he's back home with his sister Sue. And tonight, hopefully, they'll be at their home on 855 Ardmore, where you're all invited to come back for a reception there. And it's going to be good to have them back at 855 Ardmore. I'd like to now give you Bob Smith Jr., better known as Smitty, who's going to share some memories with you of the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous in his family. Where are you most comfortable? You want to stand or do you want to use that mic? Okay.
Thanks, Gail. My name is Bob S., and I'm an Al-Anon. I think I got here like most Al-Anons. I love an alcoholic. My wife was a recovering alcoholic with 19 years of sobriety, and believe me, folks, for that I am truly grateful. I've been involved in the service work. I've been the GR, I've been the DR. I served 3 years with the West Texas Assembly. And I was going to tell you that Dr. Liebold and I are Confederates. A few years ago, I got a call from our Al-Anon Central Office asking me if I would consider submitting my name to be trustee at large for all of Al-Anon. And I prayed about it, and I seemed to have the educational qualifications for which they searched. So I wrote in and said, yes, I'll be glad to do that. Guess what, folks? I didn't get it. Well, you know how I felt. This was rejection again. We hate rejection. But what I want to tell you is that my program came to my rescue like it always does when I let it and said, hey, whoever got that job was capable of doing a much better job than you and was going to serve a much better way than you possibly could. And maybe your Heavenly Father has something else He wants you to do. And I'm totally free. And that's what happens with our programs when we let it. I'm so glad to be here with John. I have nothing but love for his mom. And I want to describe her to you. She was a beautiful Southern belle, extremely gracious lady, very kind lady, very, very spiritual. And she was a friend of my mom's. And one day, just about Mother's Day in 1935, my dad had come home the day before with a potted plant, set it down. He was potted. Went upstairs and passed out, and Henrietta called Mom and said, Ann, there's a man out here that thinks he can help Bob. Bring him right on out. Well, Mom had to explain that Bob was in no shape to talk to anybody, but she said, being good Al-Anon material, said, I'll get him out there the next day. So, as we rode along, Dad said, 30 minutes of this bird, 15 minutes of this bird is all I want. He had a terrible hangover, but it wasn't 15 minutes. He and Bill went off in a room by themselves and they talked many hours. And as a result of that meeting, thanks to Henrietta again, and at my mom's invitation, Bill came and he lived at our home all that summer. And this is where and when AA started. Henrietta was a member of the Oxford group, and my mom was a member of the Oxford group, and my dad was too. They joined secretly, as far as my dad was concerned, to see if there was some way he could stay sober, because these people were very, very Christian and seemed to have a way of life that released people. So, and I used to go to some of those Oxford group meetings. I can't remember just really why, but perhaps it was to kind of get out of the doghouse. Now, you can't tell by looking at me, but I was not a constant source of joy to my parents. The Oxford group had, as John said, was started by a Lutheran minister from Pennsylvania by the name of Frank Buckman. And the basic tenets of the Oxford group were back to basic first century spirituality. They had for absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute purity of thought, and absolute, what is it, guys? Love. Yeah, y'all know. Good. We're going to have a happy time, aren't we? These are happy programs, serious but happy. And they had a form of a fifth step. They would take a new guy upstairs and quiz him until he admitted what his problem was. And they really must have worked him over, because I can see in my mind's eye the ashen look in their faces as they came down. But you see, that was one reason that they had to separate from the Oxford group. The first one was the Oxford group catered to the upper middle class, and the early alcoholics were not upper middle class. And the second reason was the Oxford group wanted publicity, and the alcoholics already had all the publicity they wanted. And the third reason was that this was a form of open confession, and this is not acceptable to people of the Catholic faith. I don't know if you realize it, but there are Catholics that drink. Sue and I were raised in the Episcopal Church. You know, that's Catholic light. Yeah. All the pageantry without the guilt. Yeah. But anyway, it was inevitable that they part. But we owe those people a tremendous debt of gratitude. They were so serious and so sincere They scared me. They were in-your-face zealots, you know. Right, John? Yeah. And they'd say, "Are you maximum today?" And I was just barely minimum. But anyway, those good folks really were sincere in what they did, and we owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. I want to tell you about my dad. You'd have loved the guy. He was a tall, thin Vermonter with icy blue eyes that could look right through you. He was a graduate of Dartmouth, one of the Ivy League colleges in the East, the Drinkers Ivy League College. And then he came back to to St. Johnsbury, his home, and prevailed upon his dad to let him come out to medical school in Chicago. And he did that and managed to barely get his MD because his alcoholism was progressing all the time, and moved to Akron, to the city hospital, because they had some coveted equipment there. And married my mom after a whirlwind courtship of only 17 years. Dr. Bob always thought things over very carefully. He had a great sense of humor. Didn't have a lot to say, but what he said was really meaningful. When I brought my bride to be home in the early 40s, she was tall and thin, and Dad looked her over and he got me aside and said, "She's built for speed and light housekeeping." And I'd like to tell you about his sex and hygiene lecture to me as a teenager. He got me up in the bathroom one day and closed the door, and I thought, "Oh, hot dog, I'm going to find out all about it now." He said to me, "Flies spread disease. Keep yours buttoned." Some of you knew Bill, but you'd have loved Bill also. He was the absolute exact opposite of my dad. Bill was a promoter. Bill was a visionary. Bill was garrulous. He loved to visit. He loved to talk. I think Bill Wilson could see further up the road than any human I've ever known. Bill's moods never settled down. He either was high as a Georgia pine or low as a snake. But these two guys fit together perfectly. They never had an argument. And I've heard it said if Alcoholics Anonymous had been left up to Dr. Bob Smith, it'd still be in Ohio. And if it had been left up to Bill Wilson, he'd have sold it to a franchise. Now, there's one person that I would love to talk to you about because nobody knows much about her, and that's my mom. My mom, Ann Smith. You know, and Susie will back me up on this, when they decided to write the book called Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, Niles P., who was an alcoholic hired by AA to write the book, called up and said, "We're going to write a book about your dad." And I said, "Okay, fine. How about my mom?" Said, no, just your father would be in it. And I said, "I won't tell you a damn thing." And I called up Susie, and she said, "Don't worry, I won't tell him anything either." Well, almost a year went by. But you know, when you've got them by the mind will soon follow. So he called and he said, "Yeah, we're going to put something in there about your mother." I said, "Fine, come on." And he came out and he stayed with Betty and me for quite a while. Great guy. And wrote what I think is a beautiful book. Since Bill Dodson Jr. couldn't be here, I want to read and excerpt this letter to you, if I may. This letter was written to Bill by Henrietta Dodson, Bill's wife. And if I may. On Friday, June 28th, 1935, I met Ann Smith. I met Dr. Bob on Thursday morning in the hospital. On Thursday evening, when I went to the hospital to see my husband, Dr. Bob was there, and he said, "The little woman would like you to come over to the house." I told him I could not go that night, but would go the next night. On Friday night, when I went to the house on Ardmore Avenue, I met the most thoughtful, understanding person I've ever known. After talking with her for a while, I addressed her as Mrs. Smith, and she said, "Ann, to you, my dear." She wanted to remove all the barriers. I skip a little bit. Here it says, Bill W. was there at this time. I skip again. And Ann taught me to surrender myself to God and ask Him if He had a plan for me, to reveal it to me, and taught me to have a quiet time in the morning that I might feel near to God and receive strength for the day. She taught me to surrender my husband to God and not to try and tell him how to stay sober, as I had done that and failed. And taught me to love everyone. She said, ask yourself what is wrong with me today if I don't love you. She said the love of God is triangular. It must flow from God, through me, to you, and back to God. And I skip a little bit. She taught me that I should never criticize the remarks of the person leading the meeting, as we do not know God's plan. Maybe what that person says will meet the need of someone in the group. In the early part of 1936, Anne organized a women's group for wives of alcoholics, whereby in her loving way she tried to teach us patience, love, and unselfishness. And I skip a little bit more. And when I met and talked with this intelligent, deeply spiritual woman, I was completely sold on AA, Henrietta Dodson. So you see what a wonderful lady my mom was. And you see that she recognized that it was a family illness and affected the whole family right from the word go. And when Lois decided that perhaps to write around to the groups all around the country to see if there was any interest in a program like Al-Anon, she wrote to the groups that she knew of around the country, and she found out, much to her surprise, that there were 64 groups already doing it. Independent thinking on their own. My mom was a graduate of Wellesley, one of the fine women's colleges back in the East. Her family was middle management of the Santa Fe, and her great uncle was president of Santa Fe. And as a young person, he took a fancy to her, and presidents in those days had their own railroad car and could go and tie on to anybody's train wherever trains went, and they had a very opulent sort of a deal. And he liked Mom, and he took her around the country with him. So she got to see the opulent, genteel side of life. Mom was a school teacher, Dale, and was very easily shocked until AA. Gail too, huh? But you got to realize that AA wasn't an instant success. It was thought of as a cult and a bunch of nuts. We were taking people into our home to dry them out and try to work something on this fledgling program. And we weren't very popular with the neighbors. If you'd like to get a feel for that, start a halfway house in your home. You'll see. But remember, this is the lady that Henrietta had called. It was Henrietta's friend that had invited Bill to start what I consider the start of the miracle. You know, she didn't say, Bill, come over and have soup next Tuesday. She said, Bill, come live with us. Maybe you two guys can work out something. And that's a miracle. And remember that Bill lived in New York City and we lived here in Akron. And Bill said, okay. That's another miracle. So that's kind of the way that it started. And we were taking these guys into our home, and I'll tell you about the treatment. Dr. Bob, being the only medical man associated with this fledgling movement, would take a new guy upstairs and say, now, fella, I'm going to give you a shot of whiskey, but I want you to take this little bit of medicine. And it was formaldehyde. Yeah, and if there's any of you who ever smelled formaldehyde, you'll never forget it. Carol, the nurse, talked about it last night. And he knocked him out from 24 to 36 hours. He really gave him a jolt. And they brought the guy downstairs and to start feeding him, get the nerves settled, you know, and the mind going again. They had a standard diet, canned tomatoes, sauerkraut. Now, Bill had an ulcer, and he thought sauerkraut cured everything. And K-Row syrup. You got to admit, the early alcoholics were a hardy group. Now, when Susie and I, we were going to school at the time, you know, if we opened the front door and smelled formaldehyde, we knew we'd lost our bed. Susie went to the couch, and I went to the attic. But we loved it. This was recovery, folks. This was recovery. And they bring these guys in with just the blank eyes, you know, there's nothing there, and then in a day or two you begin to see a little twinkle, and then pretty soon a smile, and in a few days you've got a viable human being on your hands. And this was fun. And Susie and I didn't mind giving up our bed at all. This was recovery. And we got to be friends with these guys. A lot of them weren't just overnight guests. You know, Arch T went on and started AA in Detroit, stayed almost a year. He was that bad a shape. And the poor guy was such a gracious guy. Somebody had given me one of these deals that looked like a dog's business, you know. So I put it in Arch's shoe. And I can still see him yet carrying that shoe at arm's length and being very careful that we didn't see him because he didn't want to hurt our feelings. But we had such a happy time with these guys. Now, how's my time running, Gail? Oh, okay. I think the program is a series of nudging miracles that our Heavenly Father has sought to allow and not just destroy itself. I think the whole program was guided by God. How about this? Money. You know, Bill and Dr. Bob were both broke. This town was in the middle of the last Great Depression, and the rubber shops were down to 2 days a week. Strong men on the street corner selling apples for 5 cents apiece. I had a paper out till I was a junior in college and glad to have it. That's how tough the times were. But people had time to talk to each other, and I think this was absolutely essential to get the program on its feet. Absolutely essential because they constantly visited, they talked to each other, they went to meetings together, they met at other people's homes, and that's what kind of gave the basic structure of the program I needed. Well, Bill and Dr. Bob thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had some dough, we could have a big hospital, recovery hospital. So Bill made arrangements for him to go to New York City and meet with a bunch of people with deep pockets. Mr. Rockefeller and his group listened very patiently to their presentation and finally said, no, money will ruin it. Now, folks, that's a miracle. Now, just think what would have happened if Mr. Rockefeller and his group had dumped $1 million on 100 broke drunks. It's just horrible to even think about it, isn't it? Anonymity. John spoke about that and his mother's insistence on it. And that's a miracle. Because in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, there were people with large egos. Now, we don't have that problem anymore. But you can't be Mr. AA or Mrs. Al-Anon if nobody knows what your name is. And another thing that's done, it doesn't make any difference if you've been here 40 days or 40 years. We're all exactly the same. And that's the way it ought to be. A miracle. God, as we understood him, was put in there in the steps to quiet a loudmouth agnostic by the name of Jimmy B. from California. Jimmy said this God stuff will run it. It'll run them out faster than we can bring them in. So to quiet Jimmy down, they put God as we understood him. And you know what that's done, folks? That has allowed these programs to go into the Eastern religions. People who have an entirely different concept of a higher power than perhaps you or I have. Miracle. 1942 to 45, AA started to self-destruct. There were people hanging out their shingle as the official AA representative. They were starting AA hospitals. They were incorporating AA in different states. And a guy from somewhere down south wrote to Bill and said, hey, Bill, we got to do something about this. We're getting to be like the Washingtonians. Well, as most of you know, the Washingtonians, 3 or 4 years ago, 6 alcoholics from Baltimore decided that they wanted to stop drinking. They had the idea of abstinence. They had groups. They met with each other groups. They signed a pledged not to drink. They encouraged people to go to a church of their choice. And it just grew like wildfire. It grew much, much faster than AA. I have a book at home that shows 250,000 members of the Washingtonians were here in Ohio. But what they did, folks, they thought if this is good for alcoholics, it's good for everything. And man, they just splintered off. They even got into the issue of slavery. And in about 6 years, the movement was gone. Totally gone. I'll tell you how far gone it was. Bill had to go to the library and find out who the Washingtonians were. So in 46, Cersei knows, Bill started around the country stumping for the 12 traditions. And folks, this is the glue that holds us together, believe you me. The 12 traditions. And groups were then like they are now. They said, Bill, go on back to New York and run it like you want to. We'll run this here like we want to, and they wouldn't pay any attention to him. At the first international in 1950, my dad was there, Bill was there, my wife and I attended, and 6 guys got up. Each of them read 2 of these traditions, and the group adopted them unanimously. Now, Cersei is kind of giving you a little feel for that. It really wasn't all that unanimous. He'd been out on the floor trying to find votes for this thing, you know. And some of them thought it was a great idea, and the others thought, well, if that's what they want, it's okay with me, and the others didn't give a damn. But anyway, the vote was unanimous. That's how it works, you know. It was the group that did it. Anyway, these are the glue that holds us together. I'm firmly convinced, and I hope you read them in your meetings. We do. And I would recommend on page 565 of the Big Book of AA is the long term of the 12 traditions. Who would ever thought that it would go from 2 guys that couldn't have raised $50 between them, had only 2 things going for them. They had the idea of helping another human being, and they both had open spiritual minds. And the rest, I think, was up to the Heavenly Father. It wasn't always just a howling success. The first one I remember was a young guy by the name of Eddie R. Eddie was just been thrown out of his house with a cute little blonde wife and 2 stair-step kids for non-payment of rent. And they brought Eddie home and locked him upstairs where he'd be available as they got this knowledge. Hey, folks, you got to remember, nothing's written. They're just trying to stay a page ahead of Eddie. But Eddie was an agile young guy, and we had downspouts. And Eddie would open the second-story window and slide down the downspouts and escape. And they had to postpone Eddie's recovery long enough to recapture him. One time, Eddie got as far as Cleveland, Ohio, as you know, 35 miles away, and called him up on the phone, collect, to let them know that he was going to commit suicide. So they went up and they rescued Eddie one more time, brought him home, and when he sobered up, he had some other little problems that hadn't manifested themselves. He began beating up on this little blonde lady. Then he began chasing Mom around the kitchen with a butcher knife. So we held a group conscience meeting. And it was decided the only thing to do with Eddie was for his little wife to take him back to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and recommit him in a mental institution, and this was done. Bill and Dan were crestfallen. Here's their first attempt with another alcoholic, total failure. But I want to tell you something. At my dad's funeral in 1950, 15 years later, a guy walked up to me and he said, "Do you know me?" And I said, "Yeah, I know you. You're Eddie." And he said, "That's right." And he said, "I want you to know that I'm a member of the Youngstown, Ohio AA group, and I've been sober 1 year." Wow. So you never know the result of that 12-step call. You know, we're only called on to make the call for that hand that reaches out for help. Thank God we don't have to be qualified fully. How many of you here are fully qualified to make a 12-step call? But that is our obligation. That is our obligation. Somebody did it for us. We have an accountability. And that's where we get our joy. You know, Dr. Albert Schweitzer said, I'll close with this. I know not what your destiny may be, but this one thing I do know, that those among you who will find true happiness are those who have sought and found how to serve. Thank you very much.
Well, the world's first Alpine scooted out of here to use the restroom like I see a couple of you doing. That might be a signal that we need a little bit of a break. I do welcome you back for the second half because you have questions. There's one question. If I hear it one more time, I'm going to strangle somebody. Where is your mother buried? There you have it. Lawrenceburg. Now, they're all going to rush out now, jump in their cars. You're going to see this mad dash to Lawrenceburg, Kentucky to be the first one to take the picture.
Lawrenceburg is. Lawrenceburg is about 35 miles from Lexington, Kentucky. It's a very small place. It's where Henrietta was born, and her mother came from there. And she wanted to be buried next to her mother and father in Lawrenceburg, and on her gravestone, all it says beside her name and dates is, "Let go and let God."
Oh, great.
There's only one cemetery in Lawrenceburg.
Please come back after the break and bring your questions. Thank you so much, Smitty. It was Cersei has also brought some materials that are awesome. He will have those available for you, and he will be willing to sign those for you following the meeting or over at the house, I'm sure. And it's always a dilemma for me because as I stand up here, people ask me a lot of questions, and sometimes you have to say yes, and sometimes you have to say no. And I have one that I find it to be a dilemma. Last year, the old-timers, and it was just the mother of all old-timers panels, and they motioned me. They said, "Come here, Al." And I walked up, they said, "Take our picture." So I walked back, and I went to go take their picture, and I no sooner took their picture than a delegate from another state walked up to me and said, "What are you doing taking that picture?" So there's a lot of confusion about that, and you know what? I don't have a handbook or the rule book on that, except I always thought it was at the level of press, radio, and film. There's so much misunderstanding, and it can still mess up the work of archives. So it's like I'm like a mother cub on that, and I always try not to bring down any controversy on the archives, even when sometimes I know the right answer. But it sounds as if the group conscience tonight has spoken. But I really would like to ask our guests, is it all right with you if your picture gets taken tonight? Does anybody have any objection?
Dale, not the group picture.
Not a group picture?
Not the group picture. I think individuals can do it over against the wall.
Okay.
But there'll be some of you here that won't want that.
Well, I mean, the panel. Is there anybody on the panel?
Well, I have no objection.
All right. None of them are alcoholics. Okay, the key, according to our delegate from Area 54, this is the official results of the poll, is yes. And you know what, Cersei, you taught me that. I mean, I had somebody so mad at me at Founders Day. I mean, there's a lot of confusion. So thank you very much for letting me ask that question because I don't want to be responsible for the answer. Just a few things. I think I hope I mentioned that our baby that was birthed here, the archives workshop that you helped birth and asked for year after year after year, and we reluctantly every year at the end would go yes. We have kept the ball bouncing, we have kept it rolling, and now it's your turn. I am happy to announce to you that next year's archives workshop will be in Chicago. We have come of age. I think I have the dates on that. The dates are the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th, and good luck. If there's anything that Akron can do to help you, please give us a call. We'll pass on to you any of our strength, experience, and hope. And, yeah, we'll be there. We'll be there. Is Jim Christie here? We'd like an extra couple $1,000 in our budget, please. We're accustomed to living pretty high at this conference. Okay, after the meeting, I think I announced that, too, that the house will be open. There'll be pizza. there, and we thank the house for that because we'll be ready for a little pizza, I'm sure, especially if it's getting warmer. Can you feel it a little warmer here now? Okay. And, okay. Is there anything else? Anybody else think of any housekeeping? Oh, we did not provide transportation, but there's this miraculous thing that happens every year. Somehow you all get over there. I think you're on a bus line. No. Just pile in the cars. You know what? In the old days, there's something an old-timer told me right before she died. She said, Gail, one more thing. There was never an empty car. There was never, they always piled people in those cars and went to meetings together. So I asked, if you don't have a ride, stand at the lobby. Please, those of you who have an empty seat in your car, swing by that lobby and motion to somebody, and they'll hop in with you. Okay? Thanks. You know, just like the old days when you jumped into any car that was driving by. You know how to do that. Okay, this is the Oprah part of the show. I hope it doesn't turn into the Jerry Springer part of the show. Ernie Galbraith was not able to be here, and his wife graciously accepted. Now, I have to tell you about Ginny. Ginny, and it's just like the Dotsons when I talk to them, they tell me they have nothing to say. And an hour and a half later, I'm saying, thank you very much. I think that it is intimidating, but I don't think they'll ever find a warmer, more loving crowd. If you were ever going to make a public talk at all, this is probably the most loving, warm. You can't make a mistake. Can't make a mistake. And Sue feels the same way. You see that door? She's been eyeing that door. But I do appreciate both of these ladies for coming tonight because I really did. I said I would be as gentle with you as I could, but we do have some questions, and I know you've got some answers. I have sat on Sue's couch as she flipped through books, and what really got to me was I thought I knew the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have worked real hard to try to gather the pieces, to pass the pieces on, why we still can ask the questions and learn it. And I was amazed the last time I was over there to find out there is a lot that I didn't know. For example, I did not know about Earl Treat's father and the 12-step work he was doing. I did not know about that. I did not know about some of the different centers besides St. Thomas Hospital and City Hospital, these little pictures that she has of different centers and places that they took the early members. I know that Ginny has some background on the, I think the thing that impresses me that I don't want us to ever forget, and that the story hasn't been told. We've seen My Name is Bill W., and I don't know if you were like me, as I watched that story unfold, and I know the story, and I had 20 people, girls I sponsored, and all these people over at my house, and was watching it, and I think because I know the story so well, it was 11:15, and Bill hadn't gotten sober yet. And I knew they weren't going to tell the Akron story. I had hoped, I had expectations that those early men and women and the sacrifices with love, I don't know, maybe it isn't a sacrifice when it's done with love, but the way they opened their homes, the way they opened their hearts, the way they shared what they had during the darkest times of the Depression, the way they stuck together in the fellowship that they shared one another, these people witnessed that. They witnessed them taking them into the homes and the special quiet times in the morning, and some of the things that not just the alcoholics did, most particularly the families of the alcoholics did. How much they appreciated their loved ones getting sober and their willingness to stand by their men or stand by their children, and they would have gone to any lengths. And they were actually members of Alcoholics Anonymous at that time. They were not considered separate from this program. They considered themselves a part of the us and the we. And so when I was talking to Ginny, there's something particularly that we'd like to see brought out. And I think we could just bring this microphone down here, or maybe I'll just hand you the microphone. Let me just hand you the microphone, Ginny. I'd like you to tell us about Ernie's mom and some of the things that she did. You can start with like the Upper Room, the little Methodist publication that just happened to come out in the spring of '35, just coincidentally, and that was our first meditation book. How did we get that book?
Grandma Galbraith was a Methodist, and this book was distributed by the church. So in the beginning, I believe Dr. Bob, Bill Wilson would come up to the house, and they would have this discussion, and part of the program was with the Upper Room. And they would discuss the whole thing, and then they would kneel and have prayer, which I thought was very touching. At the beginning, with Grandma and her son, now when I'm talking about Ern, that's my father-in-law. Fourth man, an alcoholic.
7 months left.
7 months left, yeah. I guess that they would meet at Grandma's house, and a couple of times when they were meeting, they had these discussions. I'm getting a little nervous on this. But I did want to tell that as the program grew, they had to have it at other houses. And then it grew larger, so they went to Curtis Cottage up at the university. And that's where they would have their meetings then. And from there on, Ern, although he slipped, he still, when he got sober again, he really tried to work with the AA group. And it wasn't for nothing. But one of the things I thought was sort of interesting was at one time, for some reason or other, Dr. Bob sent this, I guess he was a young man, wasn't he?
What's that?
Doug?
Oh, Doug, yeah.
Yeah, he sent
Yeah.
Doug, I guess I should say Doug G., up to the house for Grandma to sober. Grandma took in a number of the drunks at that time. And so I guess Alcoholics Anonymous said even at that time they'd heard of Dr. Bob because this boy's father brought him down from Canada. So the word had gotten out quite a bit then. So from there on, Grandma took him in the house. He stayed 2 years. Now, he wasn't drinking all that time, let me tell you, but he did stay 2 years.
He went to school.
Yeah, he went to school. He ended up then living with Grandma and them after he sobered up. I guess he really, liked staying there. And so then I remember also going over to the house, and Bill Dodson was there, and Dr. Bob and Dr. Bill, Mr. Bill Wilson, I'll get it, Bill Wilson. They were all there, and they would be discussing some of these, programs. And afterwards, when Ern and Sue and I would go, and my husband Ernie would go to King's School. And over at King's School, Annie was always there at the back, very warm, shaking hands with everyone that came in. And then she would break off to go talk to any new ones that came. And then Dr. Bob would be up in the front, mingling with the folks up front, and then he would usually give a speech. Right.
How long was the speech?
Well, I don't really remember.
Well, the whole meeting was only about, 2 hours at the
Yeah.
most.
So he would be part of this.
That's including donuts.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So anyway, that was the only part that I just thought maybe some people would like to know that they did have these meetings at other homes. And they did get something out of this upper room that was the Methodist magazine.
Okay. Sue, what are your memories of King's School? Do you have any memories of King's School that particularly stand out?
Oh, well, a lot of people think King's School is entered by the front door, but it wasn't. It was entered by the back door. Right. And, of course, now we had to go down a hall to the left as you went in, which doesn't mean anything to most of you, I know. But then we went down steps down to the auditorium. And it wasn't a very big auditorium. I mean, it wasn't as big as half of this room. And like Jenny said, Mom was always at the back greeting people, and Dad always sat up at the front. And, Oxford group, not Oxford group, what's up, Doc? The upper room was started the same year as AA was, 1935. It's also Social Security. But we have to mention that, But anyhow, they always had a Bible at the podium, and it was a little stage. It wasn't like this. It was a stage, about one step. That's all. It wasn't a big stage. And then somebody would read maybe something from the upper room or the Bible passage, and then they would kind of give a speech. They'd give a talk on that. Of course, a lot of them in the early days, they were drunkalogs. And that's all they knew. You know, they had to get to people through their drunkalogs. And then after the meetings, they would go to Kistler Donut Shop. And they would have coffee and donuts or a sandwich, whatever they wanted, whatever they could afford. But that got to be kind of expensive, and also the crowd was getting bigger and harder to handle down there, so they decided they'd have donuts and coffee in the school cafeteria, which is what they did. And, well, that was pretty well attended. You know, the donuts. According to one fella, he used to sneak in the back door and steal hot dogs and donuts, but I don't ever remember having hot dogs. But anyhow, that was King School.
Didn't the women sit on one side and the men sit on the other? Weren't they separate for a while?
I don't remember it that way.
No?
Oh,
okay.
I know.
But they had assigned
some groups
seats,
do
right?
that.
There was certain seats, and you never sat in that person's seat.
Just mom and dad's.
Oh,
They were
okay.
the only anchor seats.
We said any
Yeah.
The rest of the people just sat. I think Ethel Macy, didn't she have a special seat too?
Have what?
Ethel Macy, didn't she have a special seat?
No, she did. I didn't know about it.
Oh, okay. I thought I might have read that.
But speaking of Ethel, one memory I always have of Bill Dodson and Ethel is Ethel was just into the program, and they'd asked her to speak. And this one always kind of tickled me because I can relate to it very easily. And anyhow, she was telling Bill Dodson that she was so worried about speaking. And old Bill, you know, he was one of these southern Kentucky guys. And you Lawrenceburg people will know this. And anyhow, she told him about how afraid she was to talk. And he looked at her and he says, "Well, hell, Ethel, it ain't a paying job." I always got a kick out of that. So that's one reason I talk, because hell, it ain't a paying job.
Smitty, you have any memories of King School that you could share with us? Or even over at Palisade? Some of you were at T. Henry's, right? You attended did you ever attend an Oxford group meeting at T. Henry?
Yeah,
Anyone
but
here?
it was just, you know, let's face it, we were 17 and we didn't pay too much attention to the
Well, why weren't you,
gist of the
Sue?
thing.
Sue, why weren't you paying attention? That is...
Well, we had other things on our minds. Like we had to get to bed early, you know, for school.
Sue was busy. We got some questions? Okay, John.
I went away to boarding school, but during the summer, my mother used to take me to meetings at T. Henry's. I surrendered, when I first joined the Oxford group, I surrendered at T. Henry's with T. Henry himself. And when we started to get some AAs, well, not AAs, some drunks there was no AA then, coming to T. Henry's, I always used to make the point that here I was just a teenager, but that while alcohol wasn't my problem, like everybody else, I had other problems. And so this could help you not only with your problem if you had alcohol as a problem, but any other personal problem. And then, of course, later on when the King School Group was formed, well, my mother used to go to that regularly until she had moved to New York in the 1940s during World War II. But I used to go there with her, and it was a real good experience for me, even though I wasn't an alcoholic, because we didn't consider that there were any different people than the rest of us. We were all there trying to help each other with our shortcomings and learn spiritual growth. I have another feeling about King's School because I went to school there, and I can remember walking down the halls whistling, and George Weber, Delphine's husband, who was the principal, tapping me on the head rather hard with his pencil. So it's a good thing the Oxford group came along, and my mother became good friends with Delphine because it gave me a better outlook about Mr. Weber than I might have otherwise had. But years later, when my wife happens to be from New York City, Brooklyn to be exact, and after I got out of law school, I was with a New York law firm for 5 years. My mother was then living in New York, and she used to take me to the annual meeting of all the New York groups. It was a great big meeting. They had sometimes 3,000 people there. And I'll always remember there was a judge from Brooklyn, and he got up and witnessed and said, "My name is so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm 10 years old." And he said, I thought I was pretty hot stuff because I was 10 years sober, but he said, my wife has a good way of keeping me deflated, and she came to me the other day on my 10th anniversary and said, "Conroy, you've been sober for 10 years and you're still a heel." And it just made the point to me, you don't have to be an alcoholic to have this life do something for you. And I know it did a lot for me. I still have a way to go, even though I'm 80 years old. And but I think I'm a lot better husband than I would have been if it hadn't been for the Oxford group message. So King's School was a learning experience for me in more ways than one.
Your question is, when do we start the wet T-shirt contest? Keep coming back, Bob. I have a question, and I'm going to turn this over to you. I hope you guys have a few questions. But here's a heavy one for you. You ought to get a prize if you can answer this one. Does anyone know what the T in T. Henry's name means? We're really... No? We stumped the panel, folks.
You had to ask, didn't you?
Yeah. Do you know it?
No.
Oh. Okay, Cersei.
You don't hear much about, but from all the way I've been in AA, I always realized what a miracle was that Bill called the Reverend Tunks. Wasn't that his name, John? Reverend Tunks. And he looked, there were 40 ministers listed on that directory down the bottom of the Mayflower. And I've always thought Tunks was the only one in that 40 that would have done anything for an alcoholic. But he called Henrietta Seiberling, but I've never heard much more about Tunks. What happened to him? Well, Tunks was the minister of the Episcopal Church here in Akron that was Harvey Firestone's church. And Tunks knew about the Oxford group, if for no other reason than that Harvey Firestone's the one that brought him here, because his son was an alcoholic, and he thought maybe the Oxford group message would help his son. It didn't. His son didn't recover, but many other people went to the Oxford group meetings. They were held in the auditorium at one of the two major department stores down in downtown Akron. And it was a wonderful experience to see these people witnessing in this extraordinary way. And Dr. Tunks probably went to some of those meetings too. And so he got to know the people in Akron who were interested in it. And that's how he happened to give the name of Henrietta to Bill. And of course he gave him some other names. And hers was the last name on the list. because the others were unavailable or for whatever reason. In fact, one of the people that he called was the minister of Mother's Church, Westminster Presbyterian Church, who was busy preparing his Sunday sermon. And my mother had some very caustic remarks, a very perhaps uncharitable remark, to make about her minister who was too busy to do something to help someone who needed help, which is what a minister ought to be doing. But, even ministers are imperfect. So, but that's just a little footnote to history.
Nell Wing, Bill's secretary, said when Bill would, both our co-founders loved nicknames, and when Bill would go for a walk, he would say he was taking a tunk. It's an old New England term. Okay, second, Jim.
I've got a question for Smitty and Sue. This has been driving me crazy for about a year and a half with some of the reading I've been doing and trying to sift and winnow through some of the information to get a little bit more of the history. But I read somewhere that your dad had a horseshoe and a pair of boxing gloves somewhere in the basement stairwell, and what I would like to know is, did he favor these two sports? What did he think about them?
He had a doctor friend that lived over on Island Avenue, I believe, that they pitched horseshoes with. This doctor had a lit horseshoe court, and they played barnyard golf. I don't know about the boxing glove. What he said he would like to, always his life ambition was to learn to tap dance and have curly hair.
I'm the 23rd delegate from Northeast Ohio. I would be the 24th, except after Bill Dotson and Ethel Macy did it, nobody else came. The rumor was that they really didn't think that the General Service Conference was of any significance. The person I would have liked to ask would be Bill Dotson Jr., who isn't here, but I wonder if any of you know of how they felt about this.
I don't doubt it. Any of you who've ever worked for a big corporation always think that the headquarters is a bunch of idiots, right? And that they don't understand the problem of us who work in the field, right? So I suspect that maybe that was what was going on. And, there was always a sort of guarded battle going on between Akron and New York. Did you know this? Yeah, they were each suspicious of each other, and I suspect that the Ohio congregation, who was having better luck in sober and alcoholics in New York, began to think that perhaps they didn't need the home office.
No?
Sue, no recollection of that. It's a great question.
I wonder if there's a particular time or moment in each of your lives when you realized that this program that your parents began was really and truly a world movement that had changed the whole course of this century. Can you think of any? When did you realize the importance of your parents' work?
Well, I think the first time I noticed it was when they announced they had 40 men that they had worked on that were fine, and that was when they started to think about writing the book. And of course, as time went on, it came more and more and more. And there are times, when even this what I call the greatest thing in the century. socially doesn't work, and I think when it doesn't work, it's still working because it shows us what not to do. So that's my, sorry if I interrupted anybody.
Well, I'd like to pitch this up to you. You know, when you're in the midst of history being made, you don't know it.
Let me add a couple of things. I don't know how many of you know about something called Interval Brotherhood Home, which is on South Main Street in Akron. It's founded by a Catholic priest, Father Sam Ciccolini. But it's a halfway house that he started for alcoholics and drug addicts. And it's hundreds of people have gone through there. And in fact, when the Russian team came to this country about 10 years or more ago, that's one of the places that we took them. And I always remember the head of that Russian team on alcoholism. He went around and atheism was still the official doctrine. It was still the Soviet Union. And he looked at all these pictures of the Virgin Mary and crucifixes and Christ healing the blind and so forth. And he turned to Father Sam and he said, "This is a wonderful place." And it really showed how this had reached right across all these dogma and nationalism and everything. And Tip O'Neill was right, you know. This was a direct tie between human beings. So it really, that certainly demonstrated the power of this message to reach human beings regardless of other barriers. Father Sam also told me that when he was in the Soviet Union in I guess it was the late 1970s, he managed to get an appointment with the minister, the top minister of culture or whatever it was that worked out their programs for trying to instill ethics in people. And Father Sam said to him, when they finished meeting, he said, "I'd like to give you a book that you might find interesting because it deals with alcoholism, the most successful program that's been developed." And he said, "You may not like it because it has a lot of references to God in it." And the Soviet minister said, "I have no problem with God." So again, you know, we may assume that because we had an Iron Curtain or whatever, and there was a powerful dictatorship, that people's minds were barred from spiritual message, but that obviously wasn't true. And in fact, if you've been to Russia, as I have several times, you realize even during the Soviet period, the churches still had millions of people. There's one other thing that was interesting to me that shows the worldwide nature of this movement. One of my sons joined the Mormon church when he was just out of prep school. He didn't stay in it. He was in it for about 10 years, but he stayed in it long enough to spend 2 years as a missionary in El Salvador in Central America. And he told me later that one of the things that he did, he went to a group in some little village in El Salvador. He said the people everywhere were very, very poor. And this particular meeting was an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And when they found out that he was from Akron, they said, "Oh, Akron is our Mecca." So I never asked him if he told them that he was Henrietta's son, but probably grandson, but probably just as well if he didn't, because that would have distracted them from the real message. Henrietta never wanted to get credit for anything. She really believed in the anonymity and the importance of anonymity, and that spiritual people should be humble and not look upon themselves as important. And I think that spirit still pervades AA, and it's made a big difference.
I met Vladimir in San Diego. I said, "Hey, how's AA going over there in Russia?" He says, "Oh, we're expanding." And he said, "We just got our first book." I said, oh, that's wonderful. He said, yeah, but we don't use your stories. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, your stories read to us like fairy tales. We also have a poster in the archives given to us by a group in France, signed by the first AAs in Russia, if you get a chance to stop by the archives, which reminds me, tomorrow, the archives will be open in the afternoon for those of you who didn't get a chance to see it.
Thanks, Gail. My question is, does anyone know why the 12-step wording was changed from Bill's original version of having had a spiritual experience as the result of this course of action? We try to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, to the current phrasing of having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics. In other words, why do we change it from to others, especially alcoholics, to only alcoholics?
Can I touch on some of that? The reason it was changed from spiritual experience to what? Spiritual awakening was this. You know, Bill had had a spiritual experience. It went boom. Most of us don't get it that way. It's a slow, gradual process with us. So it was changed from spiritual experience to spiritual awakening because that's the way the majority of us seem to get it.
Shouldn't walk so far away.
My name's Don. I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, Don.
I'd like to ask, having grown up in an alcoholic home where I had a lot of shame, pain, guilt, and that sort of thing, and have lived long enough to follow right in my father's footsteps with the same disease, and with him having recovered now, where we can talk about it and express love and intimate friendship in a way I never thought possible when I was growing up with all this shame, pain, and guilt. I wondered what recollections you have of any shame, pain, guilt, or anything like that up until you were 17 or so that you could share with us.
Yeah. I'd like to get that one, please. The first 17 years of my life and Susie's life, we were raised with active alcoholism, and we developed ways to cope. I think all of us do that. I was a runner. I got out of that house and as fast as I could, and I stayed as long as I could without getting in serious trouble with my parents. And everybody develops their own way to cope, and I think we reach adulthood with scars. I don't doubt that for a minute. But the thing that I personally have to avoid is not to allow myself to drop into the victim mindset. I'm not a victim. All the things I did that I wasn't supposed to be doing and all the things I didn't do that I should be doing, I knew what I was doing. God didn't make me do it. I did it myself. Besides, I have learned through the program that if you allow yourself to go into the victim mindset, and it works beautifully, but in order to keep that victim mindset working, you know, it's not my fault. In order to do that, you have to feed it on resentments. And you have to resent more and more and more to keep that going. And every one of us here knows if there's one thing in the world that'll destroy us, it's resentments. So I can only say for myself, but personally, I did not intend to remain forever frozen in the role of an injured adolescent. Our programs teach us how to grow up.
I'd like to, that's possible to what Smitty said. My mother had problems with her husband and ended up separating from her husband. And it was a challenge the rest of her life to maintain a loving attitude toward him even when she couldn't bear to live with him. And she taught her children the same thing, and one result was that we had despite the cleavage, we had a fairly good family relationship with our father and between our father and mother. And that made a big difference to me in later life. Mother always taught us that when somebody did something that we thought was wrong and we started to resent it, to look at that person through the eyes of Christ. And you know, it's remarkable. I've applied that in the years since, whenever I realized that I was had an improper attitude towards somebody, never mind what their faults were, look at them through the eyes of Christ, and immediately you develop a totally different feeling about that person and begin to maybe feel sorry for them or figure out that, well, maybe I went too far and I should go back and tell them I'm sorry or try to make amends somewhere. The principle that's embodied in one of the 12 steps. So that very concept, it seems to me, is one of the most creative ideas that has evolved into AA, and it's embedded in the 12 steps. Another thing, for a politician, and particularly in a place like Congress, there's not one but many times a day when you get annoyed at somebody, one of the opposition, you know, and you have to. One of the great things about one of my former colleagues, Mo Udall, who's one of the great men who served in Congress in the 70s and 80s, was that he was always looking on people positively. And I one time said to him, you know, Mo, you're the closest thing to a real Christian in the House of Representatives, in my opinion. And his wife later told him that he was deeply touched by that, but it was true. In fact, my only quarrel with Mo was sometimes he was too quick to make amends with somebody who was trying to put over something that was not in the public interest, but that's another question.
And John, when I talked to you on the phone, what was the book that you wanted to send to Kenneth Starr?
3 guesses. I thought that Ken Starr ought to get AA, the book AA, the big book. It might give him a little humility, among other things. But on the other hand, the fault is in the statute itself, which made it possible for Ken Starr to go too far. And I have to confess that I voted for that statute because we didn't understand fully the implications of it that we've now seen happen. So one of the things that politicians need to always know is that they're fallible, because they get demonstrations of that all the time when they see the results of what they've done.
I think you had mentioned also an Oxford group book you were going to send him. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. There was another book I thought he ought to have, and it's a book that I think can be reread every so often with great value, and that's For Sinners Only.
I do know there's a few more questions, but I have one. Oftentimes I'm asked about books, and I know that Dick B has done work, but I mean, that's just so many books. There's hundreds of books when he talks about books. Could you tell, especially in an audience like this of people who are probably in every old book bin in the country, I'm surprised none of you have asked this question. What books would you say were most read, not all of them, but in an order of priority, did you perceive as being most important to the early days of the movement?
Yeah, I forget the name of the one book. Was the James book. What is it? The
Varieties.
Yeah. And then there was now titles I don't remember. Emmett Fox, and there was Dale Clark. I think it was Dale Clark. Anyhow, my dad loved his books. And then there were, like say, For Sinners Only, and E. Stanley Jones. He loved those books. He liked the later on, he liked the books like the Razor's Edge and the, it slipped my mind. But anyhow, he read constantly. And he loved the Edgar Casey stories. And of course, that doesn't have a whole lot to do with this, but in a way it probably could, because I think old Edgar could tell you how to quit drinking. I mean, medically. And of course, I don't know for how long. But I think that the Bible is the strongest one, in my opinion, and your daily prayer books are very good. Those are my ones that I know Dad likes, and that I have read a lot of too.
Okay, the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest thing in the world by Drummond, for sinners only. They loved the works of Khalil Gibran.
Henrietta had some that she felt were very important. One was for sinners only. Glenn Clark, The Soul's Sincere Desire, another. And then there was a book of daily readings called My Utmost for His Highest. And of course the Bible itself, which she read every day, the core being the Sermon on the Mount and also the 13th chapter of Corinthians. There were others. If you want to really get a picture of, Dick B. has written a book about the favorite readings of Ann Smith, Bob Smith, Bill W., Henrietta, etc. And he's done a pretty good job of it. How many are familiar with the writings of Dick B.? Well, he's done an incredible job of research and grinding out one book after another. And I haven't read all of them, but the ones I've read are, as far as I can tell, quite accurate and well researched and carefully done.
Thank you. Questions, and then we'll break to go over to Bob.
My name is Rob, and I'm an alcoholic. After the Firestone family brought the Oxford groups to Akron, did they stay active in the Oxford groups?
Well, the Firestones paid to bring the team to Akron, which was here about a week. And I am not aware of whether Harvey Firestone supported any of their activities thereafter. He may have made some contributions, but it was left to individuals in Akron to follow up and do whatever they wanted with the Oxford group message. And one of the results was this small little group that included Ann and Bob Smith, Henrietta, T. Henry Williams, Ed and Marie Babcock, one of our neighbors, and a few other people. And I remember one day we had a little picnic, and Bob was there, and Ann, and some of our other neighbors, and we had it in the Dell at Stan Hewitt Hall, which was my grandparents' home, which is now a museum. And by the way, anybody's free to go there. Well, free, they charge a fee to go through the house, but you will go by the Gate Lodge, which unfortunately you can't very well visit because my 108-year-old aunt is still living there. But that isn't going to last forever, obviously. And at I mean, maybe another 100 years or so, that property will be available for visitors. But you can go to the great house and see at the head of the stairs the beautiful portrait of Henrietta when she was a young bride. And it's a beautiful place to visit if you happen to have some time to spend. and want to have a good aesthetic experience. I might add one other interesting thing. Because my mother was at odds with her husband on certain things, it sort of made it tough for his parents to figure out how to deal with the fact that there was kind of a rebel in their midst. And when the Oxford group came to town, my grandmother became also very interested in it. And it certainly changed relationships between my mother and her in-laws, because both she and her mother-in-law were trying to lead this Oxford group, first century quality of Christianity. So there's some interesting subtleties to Stan Hewitt Hall. My mother had often spoken with contempt about this big house and how these people felt they were important, blah, blah, blah. And then that she'd turn around and say, well, I shouldn't feel that way, and after all, they're very kind to us, and so forth. So I learned a lot through that experience, too.
Hi, I'm Glenn Chestnut. This is an oddly technical question, but I've got the right group of people to ask it. Dr. Bob had a long classical education, number of years. Was there a Greek edition of the New Testament around there because he could have read it, or did he do all of this from just looking at the King James Version of the New Testament? Do you remember, in terms of the books that you actually had in the house back then?
Library. Well, they're all listed in Dick Burns's Dr. Bob's Library book, and I couldn't begin to name them. Some of them are the archives at 859 Ardmore, which is next door to our home, and we house the archives up there for Ardmore. And I don't know how many books Dick has listed in there, but there's a mess of them.
As far as I know, there was no Bible in Greek. I knew that Dr. Bob could read Greek, but he used to tell me Greek is a very difficult language, and he said, if you don't believe it, try declining a Greek verb. Very complicated language. But I never saw any Bible in Greek.
Let me respond to that question. Henrietta and a lot of the early Oxford groupers used the Moffat translation of the New Testament in the parallel version, and I still have a copy myself, and I've got several other modern translations of the Bible and the New Testament, but in my opinion, the Moffat translation is probably the best one. And my mother thought it was very important to cut through a lot of the archaic language that's in the King James Version, poetic and beautiful as it is, and it has a power for that reason. Nevertheless, it's good to also have it in modern English with a more up-to-date translation to understand the spiritual content of the words.
I would like to ask you, if your parents were alive today, what do you think they would think of how Alcoholics Anonymous has evolved? And what do you think they would say to us?
Asking me? Well, I know my mother was thrilled at the fact that by the late 60s and early 70s, there were hundreds of thousands of people in AA in this country and in many other countries. I remember during the war, when I was stationed in England, I was invited to a very grand home in the south of England of one of the aristocracy. And guess what they started talking about at the dinner table? Alcoholics Anonymous. I couldn't believe it. And they were flabbergasted when I told them where it started. But by the 70s, you know, it was an international movement, and of course today it's worldwide. I don't know whether there are any AAs in China or India, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I just think my mom and dad would say, "Egads, look what happened," or "What did happen?" No, they would be very pleased, and they would be. Well, I'm pleased for them. I have always been sort of bashful on the thing, and Kay will tell you that I wouldn't even open my mouth to say who I was at one time when we got the house, even in '85. And I don't know, it just due to the fact that I think so much of them, I want their names to be in the program as they should be. That is why I have come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and to try and keep their name and their heritage alive. That's my. Betty?
I wonder if they wouldn't be concerned over our penchant for icons. Because when they tried to put my dad up on a pedestal, and they did, believe me, he would say, "Oh, no, 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 no. I've only been used as an instrument."
You know, Bob, you're right on. Henrietta felt that one of the worst things that the Oxford group did, that one of the worst mistakes they made was to put stress on